Now imagine you're walking down a busy street and you see someone collapse. They're on the ground, clearly distressed, clearly in need of help. And you look around and you see other people seeing it too. Dozens of them, some slowing down, some glancing, most carry on. What do you do? Most people, when they think about this in the abstract, say they would help. Of course they would help. They're not the kind of person who walks past someone in need. And they genuinely believe that. But 60 years of research in social psychology has found something deeply uncomfortable. The more people who witnesses an emergency, the less likely any one of them is to help. Not because they don't care, not because they're bad people, but because of something happening in their brain that they are almost entirely unaware of. This is the bystander effect. And once you understand it, you cannot unhear it. Now, in the early hours of March 13th, 1964, a 28-year-old woman named Kitty Genovese was returning home from her job at a bar in Queens, New York. She parked her car about 100 yards from her apartment. A man she didn't know approached her. She ran. He caught her. He stabbed her twice in the back. She screamed. A neighbour shouted from the window. The attacker ran. Genovese managed to drag herself along the street, around the back of the building towards a door. He came back, he found her, stabbed her again, and fled. Kitty Genovese died before she reached the hospital. 2 weeks later, the New York Times ran a story claiming that 38 neighbours had witnessed the attack and done nothing. The story became one of the most discussed cases in the history of American journalism, a symbol of urban indifference, the coldness of city life, people who watched a woman die and chose not to get involved. The outrage was enormous, and it was real. Now here is what later investigation revealed. The 38 witness figure was almost certainly overstated. Indeed it was. Many neighbors heard something about, but saw nothing. So some called out. At least one person called the police. The original New York Times story got significant details wrong. But here's what this correction does not change. Kitty Genovese died. The response was slower and less certain than it should have been, and two psychologists disturbed by the story decided to find out why. What they found became one of the most important and most replicated findings in the history of social psychology. John Darley and B. Blattain ran a series of experiments in 1968 designed to test a specific hypothesis. Does the number of bystanders affect the likelihood of help? Experiment 1. The smoke-filled room. Participants were brought into a waiting room and asked to fill out a questionnaire. After a few minutes, smoke began pouring through an air vent, enough by the end of the session to obscure vision across the room. When participants were alone in the room, 75% reported a smoke within 6 minutes, most within 2. When participants were in the room with 2 other people who were secretly instructed to ignore the smoke, who just kept filling out their forms, coughing, rubbing their eyes and carrying on, only 10% reported a smoke, 10%. Even as the room filled with what could have been a smoke of fire, people sat and did nothing, because the people around them were doing nothing. And in experiment 2, the seizure, participants were told they were in a group discussion via intercom. At some point, one of the voices, actually a recording, began describing symptoms of seizure, stuttering, choking, asking for help, then silence. When participants believed they were alone on the intercom, 85% went for help within 1 minute. When participants believed there were 5 other people on the call, only 31% sought help, and those who did took more than twice as long. The person believed to be having a seizure. One person listening alone almost always helped, almost immediately. 5 people listening together, nearly 7 in 10 did nothing. These experiments have been repeated, varied, and tested across decades, cultures, and contexts. The findings hold. The more bystanders, the less help. Why does this happen? Well, Darley and Blattain identified 2 psychological mechanisms that work together to suppress action. The first is diffusion of responsibility. When you're alone and someone needs help, the moral weight of that situation falls entirely on you. You are the only one who can act. The responsibility is total and personal. When there are 20 other people present, that responsibility gets divided, shared, diluted, without consciously deciding to. Your brain does a kind of moral maths, where are 20 people there, someone else will handle it. My contribution is 1/20th of the total. And if everyone's brain is doing the same maths at the same time, no one acts at all. The second mechanism, pluralistic ignorance. In an ambiguous situation, is this person having a medical emergency or just drunk? We look to others for cues on how to interpret it. If the body around us appear calm, unconcerned, and unsurprised, our brain concludes, this probably isn't an emergency. They would look different if it were. But here's a terrible feedback loop. Everyone is looking at everyone else to decide how to respond. Everyone looks calm to everyone else because they are suppressing their reaction while they wait for social cues. The collective appearance of calm creates the conclusion that nothing needs to be done, even though internally most people feel that something is wrong. They see a group of calm people, they become a calm person. They contribute to a group of calm people. That's something someone else is reading as a signal that nothing is wrong. The situation doesn't create indifferent people. It creates a system in which caring people reproduce an indifferent outcome. Here's the part that matters most about the bystander. The people in Dahlia and Latani's experiment were not cold, not different, not callous. They were ordinary students who, when asked afterwards, said they had been worried, they had felt something was wrong, that they had wanted to act, but the situation, the design of the social environment around them had suppressed that impulse through mechanisms they were completely unaware of. This is not a story about bad people. It's not a story about how normal psychology in a crowd produces outcomes that look like bad behavior. And here's the uncomfortable personal question that this raises. You've been in situations where someone needs help and you did not help. So have I. So has everyone. Not because we lacked compassion, but because we were surrounded by other people who weren't acting. And our brain read that as information about whether action was required. The bystander effect is not a character flaw. It's a feature of human social cognition, evolved to us, helped to read social situations by watching others, that produces catastrophic results in many emergencies. Understanding it is the first step toward overriding it. Researchers have identified specific things that break the bystander effect, that override both diffusion of responsibility and pluralistic ignorance. The single most effective intervention: make responsibility explicit and personal. Not someone call an ambulance, not does anyone know first aid. Point at a specific person, make eye contact, say, you in red jacket, call an ambulance now. What this does is collapse the diffusion of responsibility. One person's share of the responsibility is suddenly not 1/20th, it's everything. They are the person. The second intervention is simply naming the emergency explicitly. In ambiguous situations, pluralistic ignorance depends on the situation remaining ambiguous. If you say clearly, this man is having a medical emergency, we need help now, you remove the ambiguity that the social feedback loop requires. People can no longer read each other's calm as a signal that nothing is wrong. The signal has been overridden by direct statement. Both of these interventions require one person to break the social inertia first, to step outside of the group calculation, to make themselves visible and specific instead of anonymous and diffused. This is the hardest thing, and it is the most important. The bystander effect, a mechanism built into normal human social cognition, evolved to us to help read situations through others that can, in the wrong circumstances, turn a group of caring people into a crowd that does nothing, not because they are bad, but because the system of looking at each other for cues produces a collective silence that every individual makes for a collective verdict. Kitty Genovese died in 1964. The number of witnesses has been disputed. The details have been revised. But what the case unlocked was 6 decades of research into why groups fail has saved lives. Because knowing the mechanism is how you break it. You are not a bystander by nature. You become one by default. One more video left in this series, and it is the one of the most surprising of them all. See you there.